Well, I think the question is then, if this is in these scenarios you presented, obviously China hasn't done anything like that. Is there a reason why they haven't? Is it because they don't know how the U.S. will respond? Do they not have the technical capabilities?
It may be a little bit about everything, but I think bottom line is every time you do something in terms of a military action, it's a calculated risk. And the whole idea is their calculus is going to be, do the potential success outweigh the obvious risk? In other words, if we try that limited strike, how do we know that? Are we confident that we can convince them to back down and not retaliate with the rest of their nuclear forces? Or are they gonna launch everything and level Beijing and several billion people? And of course, the other thing is, can we depend on our quote allies, the Russians, to support us? Or are they going to see an opportunity while we're busy with the U.S. to come and attack us? So the game of geopolitics, especially between the Russians and Chinese, is really fascinating. I mean, people are excited about the Russians and the Chinese working together, but I just tell everybody they're going to turn on each other eventually because they really can't stand each other and they don't trust each other. It's going to happen eventually.
Yeah, that relationship is already very fraught. China's been making a lot of inroads into all the STAN countries, to Russia's dismay.
But as long as Xi Jinping and Putin still have ice cream,
That's right. They are best friends.
Well, but I mean, what happens when you have two authoritarian regimes is that there's naturally a lack of trust in authoritarianism, right? Which is why you have authoritarianism. It's the cause of and result of a very low trust situation. And so you have these two countries in very low trust situations. They are not going to trust each other. I mean, I think that this is, to your point, there fundamentally can't be this, what the U.S. has, for example, with the UK, right? There's a high trust there.
I don't trust them.
Okay. Well, there we go.
Yeah. But I mean, you can have ice cream with each other, but I remind all, when President Trump's had a diplomatic dinner at the White House with Xi Jinping, just as they were eating chocolate cake, cruise missiles were bombing a Syrian airfield going after chemical weapons, which he actually mentioned to the premier while he was eating his chocolate cake. So the art of statecraft is one that's been practiced for thousands and thousands of years, and it is when you're shaking hands, you're also basically holding a club. You should be holding a club on the other side to make sure that the other side knows that you're not going to turn your back on them. So it's a very delicate thing. I mean, there's a maxim. I'm not sure exactly who quoted it, but it says nations don't have allies or friends; they have interests, and that's what the world is based on. It's based on state interest. This whole idea of we can be one big happy family. Well, I hate that maxim to begin with because having done domestic law, I can tell you families can get really, really nasty in some cases. But the whole idea is states have interest, and if they do something, it's not because they're going to be nice about it. It's because it's in their interest to do it at that time.
Well, so then I guess the obvious question then is, what should the U.S. be doing? Is the Space Force doing anything?
If whatever they're doing is probably classified special access project, that's way above my pay grade, and I don't need to know. And unless they decide I need to know, and hence I wouldn't be able to talk to you about it anyways. I don't know, but again, there's issues of that gets into domestic politics. How much do we want to fund them? Do we want to take this next step of getting away from this idea of we can take a gut punch and we'll just keep on taking gut punches and discourage them because we're taking gut punches, or actually have a capability to punch back hard? I mean, and the whole idea of developing an ASAT is a very, very touchy issue. Back when the air launch ASAT was tested during the Reagan administration, there was an actual program, and Reagan wanted to make this into an actually deployed force, have a wing of F-15s that were just dedicated to launching ASATs. But Congress shut him down. They threw basically, we're not going to give you the money for it, which basically shut down the program. And Reagan was very, very upset about that. In fact, he had this nice long speech that you can actually find in the Reagan archives that outline that basically goes through, and that he was very displeased with Congress's decision to cancel the program. Since then, we have not had a actual active ASAT program that we've admitted to. Now, again, The world of special access, is a black world where a lot of money goes into and is behind a lot of walls. So we don't really know what kind of offensive capabilities the U.S. does have. We may have what we call a breakout capability that we won't reveal unless there is actually a hostility that demands that we have to use it.
Well, so since like a lot of what you're talking that China is doing with this type of space warfare is actually essentially psychological lawfare, these kinds of things. What can the U.S. do about those things that the CCP is doing?
Well, we have the most lawyers per capita as any country in the world. We got to start using them, and we got to start understand. We got to get away from this idea of purely kinetic warfare and understand that we're actually at war right now. As far as PRC is concerned, we're at war, but we're in a hybrid warfare, and they're using the 3 and 4 warfares very effectively. I actually recommended in an article that I wrote last year, and I can send a link after we're done, for actually to form this group called the Special Legal Warfare Tiger Team. And basically, the idea is you gather legal professionals around a group of legal professionals who will basically come generate policy solutions to world events and transmit that up for consideration to the president, the State Department, what have you. Let me give you an example. Back in November 2021, the Russian Federation used a insular capability to missile defense to intercept and destroy one of their old satellites, and it caused a huge fracas. And all of a sudden, here everybody said, "Oh, this is a Russian ASAT test." And the problem is, we got caught in this idea of test because in the Outer Space Treaty, testing a weapon there's nothing nothing that forbids it. So even the state, even the Office of the Secretary of Defense was looking at this. What legal recourse do we have here? And they didn't, because the problem was they got caught in this narrative that it's a test. So I came out. I have a briefing letter, and I actually wrote an issue of my briefing letter for this. But basically, my idea was, look, come back instead of calling it a test, call it a demonstration of a weapon system. What's the difference between a test and a weapon system? A test basically is I'm doing this to see if I can do it. A demonstration is saying this is what I can do. And actually, a couple days after that demonstration, and I call it a demonstration, they came out in the media saying now we can effectively target U.S. GPS satellites and knock out at least a couple dozen of them. And this was just prior to the Ukraine invasion. So bottom line is my theory was this special legal warfare tiger team, if they need to come up with a narrative, they could say, instead of calling it a test, call it a demonstration. What happens then? Well, if you call it a demonstration, that's in my opinion, a technical violation of the Outer Space Treaty. In other words, the Outer Space Treaty is couched in this idea of non-aggressive, peaceful uses of outer space. And demonstrating a weapon that smashes a satellite, even if it's your own, is definitely not peaceful. So what could you do then? Well, you could blow it up in the media. You could blow up in speeches. You could instruct the U.S. ambassador to the UN to go to the Security Council and lodge a formal protest that the Russian Federation made a technical violation of the Outer Space Treaty through this demonstration. In other words, it wouldn't do anything significant in terms of deterring them, but it would definitely embarrass them on the political stage and definitely knock them back. That would be lawfare in use. But unfortunately, we got into this thing called it was a test, and it just basically locked us up in the Outer Space Treaty because the Outer Space Treaty doesn't do it. But again, we don't think like that, and we got to start thinking like that. We got to start thinking more flexibly. And this special legal warfare tiger team that I proposed would be an excellent way to start it.
Well, I don't know. Are we sure we really want to anger China? We need to work with them on climate change.
Well, this is the problem. We're so stuck on. Well, we got to keep talking. And I think my proposal is, look, talk is cheap. Talk, but come from a position of strength and not a weakness. Because whenever we say we want to talk, they love it. Back in 2018, we're going to go back to space weapons a little bit. The U.S. went to the UN Convention on Disarmament in Geneva, and they basically shut down the whole space weapon debate. I mean, they destroyed it, burnt it to ashes, because they came out and said, "Look, you talk about space weapons, how the U.S. is this bad guy. Look at everything you're doing with all these counter space technology you're developing and demonstrating in orbit. You have no legal, political, or moral right to even talk to about it." They completely burned it down, and for several years after, they tried to revive it with no success. However, the new administration came in, and the UK decided, well, what, we're going to go back to the old tried and true method of diplomacy again. And we did this thing called the Open-End Working Group for space security. The UK led it. The US was there propping it up and supporting it. And the Russians and Chinese didn't like it, but they signed and said, okay, we'll play along. And basically, they used it to revive the whole space weapon debate. And at the end of the open-ended working group, they basically, this draft report they generated, they voted against it and basically destroyed it. So fundamentally, the UK, and the US, by going back to the tried and true member, we got to talk. They gave them an opportunity to actually revive the whole space weapon thing, right from basically what were just ashes, and basically start pummeling us with it again.
Well, definitely when you were talking about the whole mirror thinking thing, I definitely thought about the climate change issue because, like, of course they should care about climate change too. It affects everyone.
Again, talk is cheap. Don't with the Chinese with the PRC. Ignore what they say. Watch what they do.
That's very good advice.
If you look at how the Chinese Communist Party treats its, water, soil, air, oceans in terms of pollution, right? But there's no reason to believe that if they clearly are not particularly concerned about the pollution impact in China on its own people, there's no reason to believe they're going to be concerned about space pollution or really about, nuclear destruction or any of these things.